This week, we welcome Fleming, Chief Technology Officer from Barracuda, to discuss the results of their 2021 ransomware research. In the Leadership and Communications section, 7 tips for better CISO-CFO relationships, 5 simple tips to help you write a powerful email that gets read, 3 strategies to secure your digital supply chain, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Let's face it, cyber attackers have the advantage. Extra Hop is on a mission to help you take it back. Regain the upper hand with security that can't be undermined, outsmarted, or compromised. When you don't have to choose between protecting your business and moving it forward, that's security uncompromised. See how it works in the full product demo, free online at securityweekly.com/extra hop. We're proud to announce CISO Stories, a new podcast series in partnership with Cybersecurity Collaborative and Cyber Reason. CISO Stories features the candid perspectives and experiences of frontline senior security executives and dives deep into timely security topics. CISO Stories is hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, VP of Cybersecurity Strategy at Cybersecurity Collaborative, and Sam Curry, Chief Product and Security Officer at Cyber Reason. Listen weekly as they speak with extraordinary CISOs by visiting securityweekly.com/CSP.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 228, recorded August 16th, 2021. I am your host, Matt Alderman, here in Colorado, but notice I have all the Texas Tech gear on. Yes, the youngest has been officially checked into college. Joining me remotely are my co-hosts. First, Mr. Jason Albuquerque.
Hey there. It's that time of year again. It's NFL preseason, Matt. We can start talking football.
I know, and I can go down and watch some Texas Tech games if I find any good colleges coming in. Yeah,
congratulations! Congratulations!
Yeah, big step this weekend. Mama did okay, so we're good. We're good. My second co-host for today is Mr. Adrian Sanabria. Welcome, Adrian.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, for me, it's for the sport I watch, it's the summer break in the F1 season. And I've been catching up on the W Series. It's a female-only F1 prep series. It's interesting seeing what they're doing with it. It's just his second year.
Yeah, you just gave my daughter a hint on something that was probably not a good idea.
There aren't a ton of Americans in F1, and I think there are 2 in the W Series.
Interesting. All right, Renee, there you go. Cyber Risk Alliance, in partnership with InfraGard, has launched the Critical Infrastructure Resilience Benchmark Study. Measure your readiness for ransomware by completing the survey and getting your score. Visit securityweekly.com/CIRB to take the survey. SC Media debuts its all-new SC Digital Experience, fully integrated with Security Weekly podcast content and more. The new site increases the scope and scale of original content resources from editorial staff, contributors, and far-reaching Cyber Risk Alliance network. Visit scmagazine.com to check out the new look. This segment is sponsored by Barracuda. To learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Fleming joined Barracuda in 2004 as founding engineer for the company's web security product offering, helping to create the first version of Barracuda's message archiving product and paving the way for expansion into new content security product areas. As Chief Technology Officer, Fleming leads the company's threat research and innovation engineering teams in building future technology platforms to deliver continued success in security and data protection products. He has more than 20 patents granted or pending in network and content security. Fleming, welcome back to Business Security Weekly.
Thank you for having me. It's really exciting to be back here. But, of course, it's a tough topic for everyone. Speaking of the preseasons, though, I was at the Niners game yesterday. So I saw Trey Lance throw his first touchdown in NFL. So that's pretty awesome.
Awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. I follow. I'm a big college and pro football person. I love the sport, so I love to follow these kids when they come out of college and see what they do in the NFL. So that's awesome. So we're going to talk ransomware today, and you guys have done some research on some of the latest trends around ransomware. I think I want to start with, we know the numbers are going up, but why? Fleming, why do we see so much ransomware?
Actually, I think it's definitely have been around. I don't think it's any news that people are seeing more attacks and probably more harmful attacks. I think that the key here that we believe that obviously the ransom asks, the payment asks are going way up, and also the amount of attacks are just constant, right? It's like a whole tsunami of them. But if you zoom back to the days, early days of CryptoLocker, things started with, I will call it virtual cash, and then it turned into a cryptocurrency, right? So I think the attacks are becoming more serious, and probably due to cryptocurrencies being more accepted, more popular. And obviously, because of that, you get the attackers thinking cryptocurrency is harder to trace, so they can actually, take action and try to gain as much as they can from it. Of course, throughout the last 3 years, we've been doing research on this area. I think started in 2019, we were focused on municipalities. Municipalities and government agencies were not very well prepared for, a data breach or ransomware attacks. You hear news about them all the time back in, even 3 years ago. Some cities got multiple attacks, right? Now, I think the things have gotten a lot worse. I think that another major reason is that we're really in the post-breach era, where basically a lot of our data have been lost. So, social engineering is much easier. There are stolen credentials out there people can buy. And from those, they can actually get into critical infrastructure, let it be network or applications. From there, they can get to the most important asset, which is data. So I think because of multiple factors, including it's more lucrative with cryptocurrency, they obviously think it's untraceable, but it is actually. But still, it's harder to stop this type of momentum from coming from them. But at the moment, we see a large increase, and we believe this trend is not stopping. So everyone needs to be prepared. Yeah.
Yeah, and crypto has played a part of this, and there's a lot of things on the financial side, and I follow the meme stocks too, and crypto plays a little bit into that. So that's a sidebar. But I think it's the preparedness, it's the readiness. The InfraGard survey that we're doing with their members is partially on this topic, because how prepared are these different industry sectors to be prepared and ready for ransomware? And we're starting to get the results in, and I think it's a little eye-opening, is there's not a lot of readiness and preparedness. And we'll talk about that towards the end, some things to focus on. But as I go through the research, I look at the breakdowns, right, of where we're seeing ransomware attacks, and healthcare is high on the list, critical infrastructure is high on the list, travel, municipalities, which doesn't surprise me because that's your state and local governments. Are those numbers higher than they have been in the past? Are we seeing the shift away from traditional financial services to these other sectors because they're not prepared for ransomware?
I do see a large increase against corporations, organizations, and it doesn't have to be financial at all. Partially because people are really buying cyber insurance, right? So there are a lot of folks who believe they're protected with the insurance, but in fact, they're just opening up as major targets if you're actually leaking the information by insurance. So in many months ago, I talked about not paying the ransom if you can. Also, prevent leaking of your cyber insurance information to the outside. All these are considered secrets for any organization. So, but really looking at the situation now is anyone has digital asset or creating digital asset or even hosting customer data will become a major target, right? So in many ways, I think we're all targeted, but obviously some of the big ones you heard, it doesn't even have to be in US. It's all across the world. This is happening. We have seen companies in Asia, in Europe, under attack, and the ransom ask is just as high as over here, right?
Yeah, I mean, from an organization perspective, we're in this strange conundrum, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we have to, we're obligated in some instances to have cyber liability insurance. I know as a managed service provider and IT services company, as part of vendor risk assessment, we're asked, do you have cyber liability that covers you up to 10 million, right? So in many instances, to do business, we're required to have that cyber liability insurance. Ultimately, if something were to happen, in an incident response scenario, a fiduciary, an attorney gets assigned to any type of security incident. And then from there, if it's a ransomware incident, you get a ransomware negotiator. So, for the malactors, it's almost like guaranteed money. Let's ask for 10 million and we'll probably get 5, and ultimately we're kind of chasing our tails there. And in some instances we say, don't pay the ransom if you don't have to, if you can, if you're not in a position to pay them, don't. But, I've had conversations with CFOs of Fortune 500 companies, and they basically say, listen, it's an exercise in risk mitigation. If I'm going to lose more in those few days that I'm down or weeks that I'm down than I will by paying the ransom, I'm paying it because I want my business up and running. So, it's kind of that conundrum that we're in as businesses is, ultimately you have a CFO and a CEO saying, I need my business back up and running, so I'm just going to pay the ransom. And for us as cyber experts, we're saying you're enabling the problem, but business needs to operate. So where's that happy medium, right? It's ultimately, I think we need to do better as far as shoring up our ability to be resilient against ransomware attacks.
Exactly. And I think it's being prepared, rather pay the good guys to be prepared versus where you get into a situation where you're paying both. And then sometimes it's not going to be just one payment. It's extortion after extortion, right?
Yeah.
So when the data feeds, if you lose data, most likely the data will become weaponized again, and it can reappear, and it can actually be used against other organizations that you're connected to. So I think it's a cyclical problem, and really getting in front of it, be prepared, and be aware what to do is really important. And now the good news is that we also see negotiations are coming to fruition a lot of times, and you actually get some of the money back if the authorities are involved. So I think there's all signs that's potentially we can get some handle or even some I think resistance against this type of kind of just open season kind of attacks. But it will take time. Yeah, it takes the whole industry to be ready to drive, sort of the change of the tide.
Yeah. And Fleming, that's a good point, because I've actually seen that in action where, we've had a client be a victim of a ransomware attack. The incident response team comes in, does their thing, and makes all the recommendations for remediation. And then they get hit again. I think it was like 10 months later, they got hit again. And it was a situation where now the cyber liability insurance would not cover part of it because they made remediation recommendations that, they didn't necessarily implement correctly. So now it's a conversation in, are you going to get reimbursed for that?
Yeah. And I think that's the exciting part for service providers. The reason I bring that up is, look, when I joined Barracuda 2004 timeframe, things were quite simple, right? I wouldn't call it simple, but you have people working together, conjugating in a building, maybe a few branch offices. You can have a relatively sophisticated system to actually protect you, right? But now cybersecurity is actually getting a lot more complex, and the attackers are more sophisticated. And we're in the post-breach era, so it doesn't have to take multiple phishing, or social engineering steps to get to your maybe legacy credentials, or even potentially credentials that's active, to eventually launch an attack against your public-facing infrastructure, right? So in our report, we are trying to raise the awareness of application infrastructure protection, as well as network security infrastructure needs to be really up to the level where you have zero trust on all the edges that you actually operating. And from that perspective, really reducing the attack surface. Even you have being inside of the post-breach era, with most likely a lot of data could be on sale in the dark web, right? So speaking about all that, it's really going beyond just clicking on a file, you're seeing an email, or clicking on a link. Those could be actually used for spear phishing or phishing to attempt to get your credentials, but more than likely, those credentials are already in the criminal's hands. They're attacking your infrastructure while you're not looking, right? So having service provider like you guys to be able to monitor and watch over all the different attack surfaces using technology like XDR behind a service that actually help the customer who are less prepared today and the attacks are more sophisticated is one of the key things we want to drive. So definitely important to pay attention to. Yeah.
Fleming, I also noticed we talked a little bit about this with the ransomware payments. Cryptocurrencies fueling higher ransoms. I think cyber insurance is fueling higher ransom. We're seeing double and triple encrypted, where you pay a ransom and then you got to pay another ransom. Are these like the main trends and why we're seeing the higher demands around the payments for ransomware? Is these different factors around cyber insurance, crypto, and like multi-stage ransomware attacks?
Yeah, actually, that brings up a good point, because through our study this year, we actually see a little bit of a bright spot where people are refusing to pay. So I also believe the bad guys are not getting all the payments they wanted, the smaller payments maybe a few years ago. You guys remember, CryptoLocker started with $150, right? Right now, we're talking millions, right? So I think partially because they're trying to have more effective attacks, and obviously taking data to hostage, eventually taking breach of data or leaking your data, your privacy posture into hostage. So I think they have multiple ways to monetize what they get. So I think that's another area where you see it's becoming more serious, and the asks are much higher because they can hold the data that you care about a lot. And of course, your reputation could be ruined if you're not able to keep the privacy for your customers and your partners, right? So I think those are all reasonable, I would say, basically reasonable business opportunities for the criminals to actually try to monetize on at the highest as they can, right?
Yeah. And then obviously negotiations and hope you get the payment down. Now, I want to talk about preparedness for this. And I love this because you tie into my three core themes. I've always said there's only three types of controls that matter: application controls, user and identity controls, and data controls. And here in this report, you actually laid them out in a slightly different order, but you hit the same point. So talk to us. How do I help prevent these attacks? Because the assumption has to be by now, everybody is susceptible. So what do I do to prepare and hopefully mitigate and prevent some of these attacks?
Yeah, so I think we call it to really simplify a little bit, because if you look at MITRE attack framework, it talks about 14 phases. And the attacks can come in from any part of the phase. It doesn't have to always start from reconnaissance and get their ball rolling. because a lot of the things that they need may already in their possession, right? So just phishing alone, for example, it appears, I think, in 5 out of the 14 phases where basically the attackers can find a way to get to you through email or any other way of messaging or communication to cause you to either leak credentials or leak critical information. So to that degree, I think the most important thing is make sure you protect your credentials. Of course, I mentioned there are already lists out there people can buy, especially with probably ill-prepared victims where they did a poor job of offboarding. Maybe legacy credentials can be utilized in those cases unnoticed, right? So that's one thing, credentials, to make sure you protect them. The next thing is really about application infrastructure and network infrastructure. So a lot of times, for example, what we saw in the Colonial situation, part of it's people accessing through VPN with the legacy credential. From there, then they can expand and really set camp to actually get to the data they want. So in order to protect that, you really need to make sure your application is protected by something like a web application firewall, or basically OWASP top 10 should be covered on those conditions, because let it be a SQL injection or sometimes it's content injection, and even to like broken authentication schemes that's in your application, or any vulnerability in your application software infrastructure could lead to basic catastrophic access to your data, right? Then of course behind it, the third thing that's really important is to make sure you have a very advanced data protection scheme in place, so you can do your DR correctly, right? So not leaving the data in one place, make sure they're encrypted in the cloud in multiple places, and make sure that when the bad guys gets it, you have a signal. Even they try to tamper with your data protection, like your backup, you can get the right signals to make sure nothing can come out of it. Because if you are not seeing the tampering, it could actually lead to, even you have a backup, it won't be useful, right? So these are the 3 major parts, but there are many other things we can talk about. For example, zero trust, as I mentioned earlier, preventing accessing your entire network through VPN or a segment of your network, only allowing SaaS access when you have proper security posture in play. So I think people should invest in zero trust access, not only for networks, but also for SaaS applications, because a lot of data are stored and created inside the SaaS applications.
Yeah, I want to double click into some of these, because I think credentials are the first thing, right? Lots of credentials out on the dark web. And multi-factor authentication is one fail-safe mechanism for credential reuse, right? Granted, we have to prevent credentials from being stolen, but if they do get stolen and I have basic multi-factor authentication in place, I render those dark web reuse credentials pretty much useless at that point. I mean, that's a pretty simple technique, isn't it?
As long as you train the humans, Matt, because I have prime examples of people getting prompted for MFA through, let's say, a manufacturer app, and it's, approve or deny. And because they're running 1,000 miles an hour, they still hit approve. And they don't realize that it's a pen test, right? And we're testing MFA, and we're testing their knowledge and cyber awareness. So as long as the human factor doesn't come into play and they're educated.
Yeah. And the other thing, to that degree, it's also all the processes that you have in place. You have to be really clear and transparent and really well tested. One thing I do want to mention is there are a lot of legacy infrastructure components that do not necessarily implement MFA, but may still be deployed and in use. Those are immediately should be looked at right away and get replaced if possible. But MFA can cover a lot, but again, there are still situations that you have to pay attention. For example, I think you guys know the Google Voice hack, right? Mm-hmm. Right. So they can actually try to social engineer you to get your code from Google Voice when you're enabled, then you lose access to your phone number, right? So things like that is really something to pay attention to. It's not uncrackable. There's a lot of things the bad guys can do. Yeah.
And so Fleming did say security awareness in there, Jason, by the way. So we covered that aspect.
Yes, for sure. The awareness is really important. But remember, awareness are right now the way they do training. A lot of times you build fake campaigns, right? Things that you hope these are the weapons the bad guys will use, so you drive awareness. It's definitely helpful, but at some point we have to figure out how to really deactivate the weapon and utilize the bad guys' weapons to train our people at some point. I think it's really good if we can do that.
Yeah, so Fleming, earlier you mentioned XDR, and I'd be interested to get your take on this. But do you think it's possible to detect it early enough and have humans stop these attacks? I know that's part of the, at least a goal. I think when a lot of people acquire XDR and detective technology like this, or do you feel like we have to get to the point where we can automate responses, to be able to operate fast enough to stop some of these attacks after they get in?
Yeah, definitely. So what I like about XDR is especially the open XDR vendors. And the open XDR vendors are much more, focused on getting the signals from any vendor. And they don't have to be a cybersecurity vendor. They just provide the XDR platform. The reason for that is because not everybody bought everything Barracuda or everything, let's say Sophos, right? So you end up with these gaps if you have a mixture of tools. So XDR is really capable if you're able to integrate not only on data ingestion, but also in extraction of useful data, and also be able to take action with APIs. You can do so with enough speed, so you can actually stop the attack. But there's so many tactics in MITRE's coverage. You probably have seen. There's so many angles, so many techniques. Every one of those techniques have to be somehow mapped into a good XDR platform to actually get that signal, right? So first of all, mixture of vendors. If you're it would be really crazy if you think, I'm just going to go online and go buy a XDR platform and run it myself. Actually, that's very hard, right? Imagine if you're buying a product, the company probably had a SIM product in the past, and now they have a XDR product. Just getting that product is not enough, because you need to have trained eyes. You need to know how to integrate with all the tools you have. And this is why I believe the right thing for smaller and medium-sized businesses of all different organization types should consider MSP or MSSP as an option to make sure you get the right outcome from XDR.
Yeah. We're seeing a lot of new managed XDR services. Yeah. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah. I was just going to say that speaks to the ecosystem conversation we have a lot, right? Is create a scenario where you have those integrations and communications between all of your tools, so that way you can gather the right context, so you can respond immediately, whether it's through the humans or through automations and orchestration, right? But at the end of the day, it's important to build that context across the entire infrastructure and entire environment. So, kudos to the folks who are kind of opening up and partnering with, in some instances they could be competitors, because that just shows me as a leader that you're thinking about positive outcomes instead of revenue all the time, right? Which is a beautiful thing. Because we need more of these siloed applications and tools talking and working with each other in order for us to be successful.
Exactly. So one of the things we did, I really like this company called Stellar Cyber. What they have done is a true open XDR platform. So Barracuda have successfully integrated 3 of our products with them in terms of not just data ingestion, but also taking action, right? And they can basically pre-program the platform to automatically take action if people are not watching. So you can do, for example, you can stop an IP from attempting to get into your infrastructure for a certain amount of hours or a certain amount of time until humans come in and assess the real issue, right? So we also recently acquired a company called Scout, which makes XDR consumable through MSSPs that Barracudas have partner with. So that makes it much easier if you're a dental shop or a legal office, and the real thing you want to do is call your MSP or MSSP to really get your hands on something like that. So you don't have to hire experts and run the product or assume you're running it correctly. You really get the professional help in that way.
One of the things this conversation brings up is I don't want to forget about APIs. You talked about securing SaaS applications, but now we're talking about API integration. And part of your findings also said, look, we have to protect the APIs, especially when we're dealing with these types of integrations. We want our API communication secured, not only to our XDR platform, but potentially any of our other applications that are out there. And that's a big piece sometimes I think people miss, those APIs and securing those APIs.
Absolutely. So, OWASP added API components to the to basically make sure people are paying attention to that, because APIs work only because they have tokens, they have authentication between them, they have ability to interact. And I think, if you lose, control or lose, visibility of how your application work beyond, your own setup, obviously you're interacting through APIs, you basically have a huge blind spot, right? So I think that's something that you definitely have to pay attention to. The other part is we have heard enough about supply chain attacks too, software supply chain, right? So those are also very critical to make sure you have a grasp on how your vendors are doing and what are their posture, whether they have exposed certain things that's vulnerable, right? So these are all the things that we have to really come together as an industry to figure out together.
Yes, absolutely, together. Fleming, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure always. And hopefully you can say no to ransom payments at some point. Be prepared. And it may take a few times, but get to that point and be prepared is really, really important for how we defend everyone, especially in the post-breach era.
Yes, and to learn more about how to prepare and prevent ransomware attacks, please visit securityweekly.com/Barracuda. We're going to take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.